would welcome everybody that is watching on our YouTube channel to this online conversation on the rule of law in Poland. My name is Jeroen, and I'm joined by Ula Zielińska, member of the Polish Sejm for the Greens, and Tineke Strik, a member of the European Parliament for the Greens EVA group. To everybody watching, feel free to ask your questions in our comment section. And at the end of the conversation, I'll try to pick out a few questions to answer. My first question is to Ula. Can you explain the current situation in Poland for us? Why are we having this discussion on the rule of law in your country?
Hello, yeah, thank you for the introduction. For just a little bit of your background, we have been having this conversation pretty much since the end of 2015, when the current majority ruling party, the Law and Justice Party, which is a social nationalist populist party, took power or won the elections and gained a majority in government. And since then, the Law and Justice Party has been very consequently changing institution after institution in the whole Polish justice system in order to gain control, to gain political control and to centralize it in its hand. And so, for example, at the very beginning, 2015, the Law and Justice Party started from combining the position of the Minister of Justice with the position of the Chief Prosecutor into one position, of one superpower position. Then the Constitutional Tribunal, lawfully appointed judges have been replaced by political nominees to give the political nominees majority in the Constitutional Tribunal. And since then, it's been ruling fully in line with the political, with the majority party's will. After that, they proceeded to change legislation that rules over that common courts. The National Council of the Judiciary has been fully replaced. The way the judges are appointed there, the National Council of Judiciary is meant to safeguard the autonomy of the judiciary, the independence, and it's been again appointed in such a way that it's fully politically biased right now, and therefore it cannot fulfill its main duty. And then there was a big case and a big attempt to restructure the Supreme Court. That was it started in 2017 and is actually an ongoing issue. And that's when the EU Commission has joined in. So Supreme Court, initially the Law and Justice tried to remove actually majority of the judges by lowering the retirement age to age 65, which would remove 32 out of 60 judges of the Supreme Court from their duty, including the head judge. That was met with a huge opposition from the citizens, from political parties, from many NGOs, from Europe as well, and eventually it ended in the European Court of Justice. As one of the changes introduced back then was also a right to reopen any judgment in force at any point within 10 years from actually ruling it. So again, a very powerful move that introduced chaos into the Polish justice system, and fortunately, some of those changes have been pushed back through the actions of the European Union, through the European Commission, which triggered Article 7 towards Poland, first time in the record, first time in the history of European Union, sadly, and the European Court of Justice has also started a procedure against Poland and managed, through this procedure, to stop the most harmful changes to the Supreme Court, which is our ultimate court safeguarding the independence and autonomy of our justice system. So that is still an ongoing procedure. It was dialed down a little bit during elections. We had local elections in autumn 2018, then European elections in spring 2019, and then the parliamentary elections in, again, October 2019. Since the elections are over, the changes, the reform, or we call it deform, of the justice system has sped up again. And now we have the new law, new legislation just passed, which was coined a muzzle law. And I'll explain in a little bit why it's that.
Yeah, thank you. Now over to Tineke. Tineke, can you explain us why this is also important for the European Union and other member states? Because people would say this is just a national competence, something that the Polish government can do by itself.
Yeah. No, this is what is happening in Poland is a concern to all of us. I mean, European Union is not only about economic cooperation, it's also about safeguarding the values and the rights of the citizens of all European member states. And one of these important elements of the rule of law and of the rights is also that national governments cannot be reformed into kind of dictatorships, that if there are no checks and balances in a country, then you may run that risk. And therefore separation of powers is important, which means that judges need to be independent, so that citizens can really turn to independent judges, also to protect themselves against a government who may be arbitrary or oppressing or whatever. And now, as Ula rightly describes, the government has completely control over the judiciary, which means you cannot turn into to a judge anymore. And this is, I think we need to protect the Polish citizens against this development. And at the same time, of course, it's also concerning for the fundamentals of the European Union itself. We have the principle of mutual trust in criminal cooperation, for instance. But what we see now is judges in other member states, they are hesitant or reluctant to cooperate with the judiciary in Poland because they say it's not independent. So suspects or other people are not transferred anymore to Poland. And I think if this continues and you see this worsening of rule of law in other member states as well, we really lose confidence of the citizens if we cannot manage to stop this process.
Okay, so Ula, we just talked about the muzzle law to limit the freedom of speech for judges and their freedom to work independently. Can you tell us a bit more about how far along is this process now of adopting this new legislation? And what's the role of you as a Green parliamentarian, or the roles of civil society in this?
Yes, the muzzle law, which the name for this legislation has been coined by the head of Supreme Court herself, and it came out on the 12th of December. It's been shared with the public. On the 20th of December, it's already been under the first reading in the lower house of parliament. And pretty much by Christmas, it was already signed off by the lower house. So a very fast track procedure, obviously without any public consultations, which is also important to mention. And the lower house of parliament, where I work since November, proceeded overnight. The committee of equivalent of the EU Committee of Libe Justice has proceeded overnight to try and put over 100 amendments into this law, and failed due to being a minority. What this legislation introduces, it enables the so-called disciplinary units of the Supreme Court, also recently created by the previous legislation that I mentioned. It enables us to punish, to prosecute judges for saying or doing almost anything at work or in private that could be judged which is very loosely defined in this legislation as politically biased or not in line with the rules or with the values of judiciary. And just by the how loose the definition of it is, it's just enables really the disciplinary unit to fine financially or just to remove from a position any judge for almost anything. Moreover, judges are banned within this with the force of this legislation from questioning if a state institution is functioning in line with constitution or against it. Something that is a fundament of their work, of their duties, is they could be penalized for that again. Also, if they prioritize EU law over local legislation, which is actually written in our constitution. EU law is our law, and it's the utmost supreme law absorbed by the country, accepted by the country just by our entrance to the EU. It's also questioned within this legislation. So many, again, measures taken very much because despite of all the attempts to muzzle the judges, despite of all the attempts to discipline them, they have been very good at really standing up to what's unconstitutional, what's unlawful, and they have been very much using constitution directly to rule. And this is a clear attempt to stop them from doing so. So it's been through the same lower house. It went into the Senate, the upper house. It's been rejected by the Senate, where there is a bit more balanced powers between the ruling governing party and the opposition. And in the Polish legal system, if a legislation is rejected by the Senate, it goes back to the lower house, the same, for further proceedings. If it's accepted there, as this legislation was, that's final. It then goes to the president for a sign-off, and it goes into force. And this is exactly what's happening right now with this muzzle law legislation. It's now with the president awaiting the sign-off, and there is little doubt that the president won't sign it, as he is fully at the service of the Law and Justice Party.
Yeah.
Okay, and Tineke, I guess you can then say the role of the European Union in this.
Yes.
I think the EU needs to intervene. What are the options that the European Union has?
Well, the European Commission can always start an infringement procedure. What actually means that Poland is brought before the Court of Justice because they are violating EU law. What also has been done is that Polish judges, the highest court, asked the Court of Justice to give a ruling on this disciplinary chamber, if that is in compliance with the rules on the EU law, if this is independent and if it's a really an effective remedy for citizens. There the Court of Justice gave some criteria explaining that, it cannot always be called independent, but it's up to the Supreme Court. But it was giving really a direction towards the Supreme Court, saying that you really have to assess very critically if the disciplinary chamber is independent, and if not, you are not allowed, or you don't need to bring your judgments before the disciplinary chamber. So then actually you need to stop cooperating with the disciplinary chamber. Well, the Supreme Court did so, but now it will be up to the Constitutional Court in Poland, which is composed of supporters of this current government. And it may end in a decision that EU law should not prevail over Polish law. So it could mean that the Constitutional Court is already in the hands of the government, which can sideline actually the EU law. So this shows that it's limited what we can do, but nevertheless, the Commission has started to ask the Court of Justice to come up with an interim measure in order to suspend the functioning of the disciplinary chamber. We need to wait for the new decision of the Court of Justice. And now if this new legislation is adopted and signed by the President, I'm pretty confident that the Commission will go again to the Court of Justice. And these rulings are very important, even if there's a risk that the Polish government or the Constitutional Court doesn't obey with this. Also in order to show civil society and judges in Poland that we support them, that some change need to come in Poland. And of course, we have this Article 7 procedure, which Ula already mentioned, which means that the member states themselves can decide that they are going to take steps, making sanctions and make sure that Poland start behaving in compliance with EU law. But this is a very difficult procedure because member states tend to protect each other and tend not to really intervene and address each other's problems. And what we do as a Greens in the European Parliament is to really urge the member states to have some courage, to protect Polish citizens and to take concrete steps. And that can be in the Article 7 procedure in the Council. But what member states can also do is start a complaint for the Court of Justice towards Poland. So they can also collectively, Poland, you are violating the EU law. And therefore, we bring you to the Court of Justice, which can have a ruling on that. I think it's so urgent at the moment, and there's such a big risk of escalation that we need to do everything at the same time. And that also means that we need to support civil society and also show that we are really standing behind them and that we're not leaving them alone.
Okay, thank you. Now, from some questions that were asked in the comment sections on YouTube, maybe more for Ula to start, but Tineke can add if she wants to. Do you already see practical consequences of the new laws or the proposed laws for citizens in Poland? Can you say something about that?
Yes, there are already practical consequences, first and foremost for the judges. So we already have a whole plethora, whole reports on cases where judges have been moved from their positions, expelled from their courts for certain decisions that they've taken, or for the fact that they were openly criticizing outside of the court the proceedings. There's been recently, obviously there were huge civic protests since the very beginning of those changes. And lately, if I can tell you an anecdote, a really sadly not a great one. There was a walk of or a protest as a walk of judges which wanted to wear their togas, as a protest against the muzzle law, called the Walk of 1,000 Togas in Warsaw and in other cities of Poland. And some of the judges were banned by their heads of the courts from they couldn't take the toga with them to the protest. But obviously there are much vaster, much more dangerous decisions that were already taken towards certain judges to stop them from doing their job for just the criticism against the government. Obviously, the changes which were justified by the government as trying to really truly reform the justice system, which is slow, and this has to be admitted. Our justice system is slow. It takes too long to bring it from the beginning to an end, and that was an official reason for all the changes introduced. But in effect, they actually slowed it down to a record times ever. So our court proceedings are now longer than any time before. So obviously that didn't work either. That reason is not a real reason, as we knew, because none of the changes introduced were really showing, were really making sense in any way, trying to speed up the proceedings or to make courts more efficient. Just to the contrary, they may introduce a lot of chaos. If you think about the decision to, some of the decision from the Supreme Court from last week, which was that judges appointed by the National Council of Judiciary, that is fully politically biased, cannot judge right now. So we are in a kind of a stalemate, waiting for the next decision, the next move. So a lot of chaos already introduced into the system. There is over 100 judges appointed by this the politically biased Council of Judiciary, and they've already in the process of issuing thousands and thousands of rulings, and those rulings will be probably invalid. So that will, if you think about the chaos this will introduce to daily lives, it's incredible.
Maybe to add on that, if I may, Ula, you talk about the slow process and the chaos, but I see also a risk of the protection of citizens in their fundamental rights. What I see is that this policy is really intimidating judges, and we really see, and we met with very brave, very courageous judges who speak up and who start demonstrating. But there are many more judges where it may have effect upon that they, do not dare to come up with brave judgments. If you look at the Polish policy, for instance, regarding LGBTI community or other fundamental rights of citizens, I can also imagine that it will be useless for them to go to court if this is continuing. What do you think?
I absolutely agree, and there has been already documented cases where this has already started happening. So absolutely you are right. What I can add to that is that the government has also started a very aggressive campaign against judges as such, through a public television, which is again now fully biased towards one political side and fully at its service, has launched incredibly aggressive TV series called Cast, where it's portraying judges as a corrupt group, and it's really really harming and really seeding this uncertainty, the division into the society. There has also been a public a kind of a media brought up information about a deputy minister of justice who was ordering and managing a hatred campaign via social media targeted at specific judges, those who criticized the reforms. And whilst he was he left the Ministry of Justice as a consequence of this, there was nothing happened after that, so that there was no investigation into the whole process. Nothing has been launched and started to actually investigate. So there is a real concerted effort to really
silence them,
fine and really marginalize judges and really silence them. Yes.
Okay, and another question. There are people saying, hey, it's an election result where the Law and Justice Party got a majority. What about the support of the Polish people? Do they support these reforms, or what can you say about that?
So there's been very serious protests from the very beginning, and very consequent ongoing protests every time a new legislation was discussed, was voted through the parliament. There's been really active citizens who were voicing objection. But if you think about, it's been 5 years now, almost 5 years of an ongoing struggle, ongoing changes. I can't even remember how many amends the legislation, the Supreme Court or Common Court's legislation has already had over the past 4 years. So people are losing track, increasingly losing track of what is happening, and increasingly getting more and more immune or tired of this process, whereas the public TV launching this aggressive attack on judges is obviously not helping, or helping this awful process from the other side, introducing a complete chaos into what people think about it. So it's becoming now really difficult to stand up also from the civic side, just because of how tired and how over what is actually happening.
If I may add, I can imagine it's such unequal, actually, because judges, in principle, they do not stand up and publicly speak, whereas the government has all tools in the hand to frame and to even come up with fake news. So therefore, it's so important that there were at least a pretty large number of judges who dared to speak up. And what we saw in the demonstration, indeed, that there are also many judges from other member states coming to Poland to stand at the side of the Polish judges. And I think this could also make, if we do that more and more, we could also make sure that citizens are not getting more tired, but also get more hope and perspective that they are not left alone. Therefore, I said we should cooperate a lot more, and also be visible, I think, in Poland, to show that this is not your problem, this is our problem, and we need to make sure that we overcome this.
Absolutely, because if there is a hole in a justice system in Europe, in Poland, it means there is a hole in a justice system in Europe, and therefore no European country will be able to be sure of rulings that came out of Poland, and will be able to question them, and we don't want that, because that introduces a chaos. One thing I want to mention as well is that also the civic society is in a process of, or there is a narrative that is trying to silence the civic society or the opposition, politicians like me, from speaking up, in that we are being coined as traitors of the internal, it's what the narrative is in the public media, for example, is that this is an internal affair of Poland. Poland is completely within its right to resolve it internally, and by voicing the concerns to the European Union, to the European Commission, to our friends in European Greens, for example, we are acting as traitors to our country, which is as harmful as it can be, because European Court of Justice, what I keep emphasizing, is my court. That's my institution. I'm European. I'm the citizen of Europe. I have right to demand from it that it stands up for the rights, for the human rights, and for the law, for the rule of law in Poland.
And does this also apply for NGOs, so for civil society organizations, that they are silenced as well and intimidated, that it's also more difficult for them to speak up?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we're all
called
as traitors for trying to speak up for this. So that's another angle to this story.
Yeah. Are there any more questions, Jeroen, from the journalists for the public?
I guess that was about it that we have. We're also through our time that we have. So maybe for you, Tineke and Ula, just like one final short remark on this, and then we'll close.
Yeah, I think we dealt about everything that's going on, but sometimes I still have the feeling that the sense of urgency is absent in Brussels and Strasbourg, and therefore we also, as members of European Parliament, need to use all tools, cooperate also with members of national parliaments so that they can urge their government as well, cooperate with civil society to really have this high on the agenda at the EU, that we cannot let this happening. I mean, I'm really afraid of the escalation which will come up in the next weeks. And I think it's time now to show that there are limits to what national governments can do, and Poland already is far beyond that limit. So we really need to act very quickly and also more self-conscious about the possibilities that we have.
Okay, thank you. And Ula?
And I can only really enforce and add to what Tineke said. We will not be silenced as a society or as politicians. I, for once, also received a fine recently for raising my constitution. I have this constitution scarf I can show you. It just says Constitution on it. And I just stood up when this muzzle law was presented in Parliament and raised it up, and I was fined. So I'm just getting 3/4 of my salary for the next month for it, instead of the full salary, which is, this will not silence me. Those measures will not silence any other opposition politicians, and they will, I'm sure, not silence the judges. But yes, we need a European Union, European Commission to really be well informed, and we will do anything to keep it well informed, also within European Greens. So no information chaos, no false fake news can take over. I think it's very important, and also a prompt action. Prompt action from the European Court of Justice has helped us before on to protect the Supreme Court, and I'm really counting on even more prompt action from over the next months, weeks and months.
Yeah, maybe just one remark, because may I thank you for being so courageous, and that you don't give up the fight, and that you stay on track with the values of Europe. I wish you all the strength with that, and I really hope that we keep on cooperating on this, and maybe we can have other moments that you inform us on the state of play and how we can work together on this file.
Thank you, Tineke. Very much up for this, and yeah, good luck for your Libe committee as well to think about it. That would be great, and yeah, very open for
Thank you very much. Good luck.
Okay,
also.
great.
All
Thank
right.
you. Thank you, Tineke and Ula, and thank you also for everybody that has been watching. We'll keep you updated on this for sure. Goodbye.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
You too. Bye.